Well, welcome. This is Pam Dunwald with Patient Advocate and Match, and we are a professional healthcare services directory. And we would love to welcome Crystal Flores here with the Grateful Death. And we are super excited to have her as a brand new listing. She is an end-of-life doula. And what I want to say is that for our healthcare professionals, our listing is free for any of our potential clients, any consumers that want to go on the directory. Look around. I encourage you to watch everyone's welcome video because you get to meet all of our professionals up close and personal, get to hear from their heart, and then it's a lot easier for you to decide if maybe you would want to seek out maybe working with them because you've got to know them a little better. So we welcome you, and let's go ahead and get started. Crystal, tell us, how did the Grateful Death come about? How did that start?
Well, like most people that work in end of life, I think it's a personal story that brings you to this work. I really don't know anybody that goes to career day and says, I'm gonna help people die. So it was a personal story that brought me here, and it really changed my life. That happened in 2015. And at the time I was working in corporate sales, and my life was just sort of turned inside out from my story. And I realized when I was in it that there's just so many holes and gaps and a need for bringing holistic comfort to the bedside along with medical necessity. And I was in a place of need and didn't know really where to turn or where to get it. And so that started my mission of, I want to make sure I can do what I can to fill those gaps and holes and bridge the gap for other families, so they can have a meaningful end-of-life experience to reflect on, because we all have stories that are less than ideal that we remember. And so, you know, we do our best until we know better. And when we know better, we do better, like Maya Angelou says.
Well, so Crystal, tell me what exactly is an end-of-life doula, and what kind of training do you have? Tell us a little bit about that profession.
Yep. So an end-of-life doula does exactly that, bridges the gap between the medical necessity and the holistic comfort. And what that means is generally people have hospice in place when they have an end-of-life experience. And that provides your medical care, your supplies, you have nurse visits, you have bath aids, all of these things that are super valuable. But the doula has uncapped time. The doula is able to fill in the gaps and do the things that hospice doesn't have time to do. So sometimes that's legacy work. Sometimes that's logistical things like helping get paperwork in order. Sometimes it's, you know, I really want to have my family over for a dinner, but my kitchen's a mess. Sometimes it's errands. I mean, we wear a lot of different hats, and every single family has a different need and a different dynamic and a different dying experience too. So it could be a natural death, it could be something else, it could be an illness that is in a facility, it could be at home. Families, my whole goal is to really step in so that everybody can maintain their respective role. So now the daughters can be the daughters, and the friends can be the friends, and the neighbors can be the neighbors, and loved ones are able to come in as they always have. And the doula absorbs the tasking. So now that creates a dignified experience for the person that's dying. And I went through training through Inelda and Doula Givers. There's a little bit of controversy around doula training and certification right now. And my opinion on all of that is to do what you feel you need to do so that you can show up best at the bedside for either the people you love or the people you serve. But that's my particular training.
Mm-hmm. And do you find sometimes, Crystal, that you sometimes just sit with a client, or, I mean, just to keep them company?
Yeah, you know, what I have found over the years, when I started my business, it looks nothing like I thought it would look. It's evolved several times over the years. And the thing that surprises me the most is people want permission to talk about death and dying. And we just don't live in a culture that really embraces that on a regular basis. And so sometimes people just want to have a conversation with me over the phone and ask questions. Sometimes they just want someone in the home to normalize the process and let them know that everything is okay. Sometimes, you know, it can be very complex, but it can also be very, very simple. And sometimes people just want to be heard. They just want to be listened to. They don't want advice. They don't need help. They just want to be heard. And so the doula can fill all of those roles and then some. But yeah, sometimes it is just simply sitting and being.
And, and I always, we've talked about this prior, but I always like to make the point as, as a former hospice nurse, again, it's the supplies, it's the medical management, the nurse comes, the social worker comes, the bath aide comes, the chaplain might come, but they're in and out. We had one aide for 3 counties, and so sometimes she'd get to a home at 3 p.m, and that was the time they got their bath, and then she was there an hour or less, and then she moved on to the next client. So although hospice has a lot to offer, that Medicare pays for, it's a great program, but they don't have the time to do all the amazing, wonderful things, Crystal, that you can do as an end of life doula. And I'm just so grateful for your services, because there's so many beautiful and wonderful things. It's such an intimate, private time in the life of that person and their family. And you can just make that so much better with what you do by being able to take the time. So tell me a little bit about how people reach out to you, or how do you go about finding your clients, or I guess let's back up and say, when is a good time to contact you?
That's a great question. All those questions, all the variations are great, because most of the time when people contact me, the conversation starts like, I don't need you yet, and if you found your way to me, you probably need me. And the best time to work with a doula is really before you need them, because what we can do is really help lay the groundwork so that you can comfortably open dialogue with your family. You can put your wishes down on paper. You can have conversations and sort of set the stage for when you do get to that point. And so that prevents people from scrambling and loved ones from being overwhelmed. And then the person that's dying feels like they're a burden because everybody's going in 1,000 different directions. So the time to work with a doula is before you think you need them. And that just helps to prepare everyone, the person that's dying, the family, the neighbors, the loved ones, anybody that could potentially be called to the bedside, is done in a way that is meaningful and sacred. Now I already forgot the other question you asked me.
No, and that's, and I'll ask it, but I just want to say, just to kind of piggyback on what you said, my daughter, for example, her mom's a nurse, but she wanted a birth doula when she had her baby. I
Yes.
stayed at home. She's a few hours away, but when she contacted that birth doula when she found out she was pregnant, because
Yes.
then they wanted to lay the groundwork, like you said, and they want to plan, what is it going to look like? So really, in that
Yeah,
circle of life, it would be no different. I mean,
that's right.
the sooner they can contact you, the better, and the more time that you have to make that experience, as I hate to use the word amazing because it's someone's passing, but to make it as meaningful as
Yeah.
possible.
And that's exactly right. That's what I'm really, that's the backbone of what I do. Is my personal story was really beautiful and meaningful, the best it could be. But when I reflect back on it, I realized that I could have been a lot more present with my mom. I could have been the daughter more than the caregiver, the task doer, all the phone call doing, and the logistics. I wish I would have understood that this type of support existed, because it would have allowed that space between my mom and I to just be very sacred and very meaningful. But there was just so much to do all the time. So that is essentially my biggest intention when I go into someone's home, is what's overwhelming to you, what feels daunting to you, what's preventing you from sitting at the bedside and just being with your loved one. Because I want you to be able to reflect back on this and it feel warm and it feel good, and you have meaningful memories to attach to it. That's essentially it right there. And of course, loved ones can come in and fill in and do things, but the more present you can be without being preoccupied with all the things, the better the experience is for everyone.
And so, Crystal, when someone is thinking about using your services and they contact you, what does that beginning process look like? What do you go through to work with a client?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. It's such a great question. It really is, as you know, the most complex part about what we do is I'm usually contacted when someone's in a very emotionally charged space. And when that happens, there's a lot of other things that are on their mind. And so really, I just lost my train of thought. It's definitely the end of the day.
That's okay. We were just talking about what that process looks like when
Yes.
when
So
someone.
having a conversation and getting a glimpse into what this person was prior to illness is our greatest empowerment, because that allows me to have an understanding of what was important to this person before they became ill and became dependent on care. And so the very first thing we do is have a consultation. If we decide we're a good energetic fit for each other, then all my clients fill out a Grateful Death intention, and that's a $10 download from my website. And that is really just the story of you. And it's also a great conversation starter for people that want to start opening dialogue with their families but don't know where to begin. It's a very non-threatening way to talk about yourself in a way that helps people show up and provide a harmonious experience. You know, when we talk about sensory things, those aren't questions that we typically know the answers to or think to ask until those moments are happening. So if your loved one is really sensitive to bright light and they would like to have dim lighting in the room, that's really nice to know ahead of time. If your loved one really doesn't like the smell of lavender, that's also really nice to know in advance. You know, there's all these little things that become really, really important when the person is going through their process. We don't think to ask until it's happening, and that's not really the time to ask. And that's not really the time that the dying person feels empowered to speak up and ask for things, because they're usually feeling a little overwhelmed by all the care that they're receiving. They don't want to ask too much. The number one thing across the board I hear all the time is, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden to my family. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden. And so the more we can know about this person before we're stepping into their sacred container, the better we can make the experience.
And, before we, look at wrapping up, I wanted to ask too, when you mention, a holistic way, what are some of the things that you do that would be considered holistic? We talked about the medical, we talked about the hospital, we talked about that. So what is the holistic side of being an end-of-life doula?
Yeah, it's really the sensory thing. So sometimes that means light touch, sometimes that means Reiki, or sometimes that means having an environment that feels really good. So there's scents in the air that are soothing to this person. There's dim lighting, there's a comfortable atmosphere, whatever that is. I mean, and that varies from person to person. One of my clients was comforted by having NPR on all the time. That's just what was comforting to her. And so it's requests like that we would never know in advance unless we asked, and we don't really know to ask those questions until we're in it. And that was my story. That Grateful Death intention was birthed from all of the questions I wish I would have had answers to, that would have helped me create an environment that was a little more meaningful to my mom. Without knowing those things, you only know your person. Like, I only knew my mom as my mom. I didn't really know who she was prior to being my mom. So understanding about her likes and dislikes and sensory things, that's the holistic comfort element. Making the person comfortable, having the things surrounding them that feel good and safe and warm and inviting and harmonious, and making sure that everybody that enters that space will honor those things. It's everybody wants to be able to know how to show up at the bedside, but we all feel a little bit anxious or nervous because we're not sure, are we going to say the wrong thing? Are we going to do the wrong thing? And so having these answers to these questions helps you step into empowerment, which gives your person a dignified experience.
What a great resource for you to have and to create for your clients, so that you are so well prepared, before, like you said, before you get into the actual process. So if someone were to want to use your services, number one, how do they get a hold of you? And number two, are you available virtually as well as in person?
Yes. So some of the work I do is at the bedside and in a person's home. And some of the work that I do is is just remote. So coaching over the phone, like I'm a doula to the doula. So let's say, the daughter really does want to be the bedside companion, caregiver to her mother or her father or whoever their loved one is. I can coach that person virtually over the phone or Zoom so that they have these tips of empowerment. They know how to show up. They feel more grounded when they're showing up for their person instead of scattered. So I service people in the greater Seattle area in person and virtually. And then everyone else across the United States, I work with remotely. And people can contact me through my website, my email address, my phone number. Yeah.
And we will make sure that in the description of this video, when you see this, you will have all of Crystal's contact information there. So no worries, we'll have that all there for you. So Crystal, in closing, is there anything that we didn't talk about or anything that you would like to say about your business before we wrap up? Something that maybe we didn't talk about?
Yeah, one quote always comes to mind, and I don't know where I read it, but somebody said, you're not going to get pregnant if you talk about sex, and you're also not going to get dead if you talk about death. I love that, because my goal, my hope, my mission is at some point we can just be at Thanksgiving dinner talking about our death plan. It's part of the cycle. It's just like what you said. We spend so much time celebrating and honoring and preparing for birth, but when it comes to the end of that cycle, we kind of drop the ball. And so my last word of encouragement is open up dialogue, talk to your loved ones, and make your wishes known.
I really like that quote. I never thought of it that way, but it's so true. It really is. It really is.
Yeah.
Well, Crystal, I just want to thank you so much for being part of our healthcare professional directory. And I just encourage everybody, we will have the listing up, and I will put it all over social media when it's ready to go. So I just encourage everybody to look at Crystal's listing and contact her for her wonderful services. So thank you, Crystal.
Thank
All right,
you.
we will talk to you soon, everyone.